All right, let's get into it. We usually think of history as, one thing happening after another. But what if the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution weren't separate events at all? What if they were all part of one massive 300-year-long chain reaction that completely reshaped the world into the one we know today?
That's really the big question we're going to tackle here. Because, to understand how we got here, we have to see how looking backward was actually the first, surprising step in this giant leap forward.
In this whole chain reaction, it all starts with a single spark. It's this period of incredible cultural explosion that kicks off in Italy around the 14th century, totally fueled by trade money and a brand new way of seeing the world. I mean, the word Renaissance literally means rebirth, and that's exactly what it was. But here's the key. Scholars and artists weren't just trying to copy the ancient Greeks and Romans, they were basically in a competition with them, trying to bring back all that amazing knowledge and then do it even better, to start a new golden age. And at the absolute heart of this rebirth was this revolutionary philosophy called humanism. It was a huge shift in focus. Instead of looking only to God and the heavens, humanists started looking inward. They celebrated human potential, creativity, and the achievements of the individual. All of a sudden, it was about what people could do.
And you can literally see this change just explode in the art. Artists became obsessed with realism. They started using these new mathematical tricks, like linear perspective, to create these incredibly realistic scenes with real depth. The focus was on the human body, on emotion, drawing on old myths and Bible stories, but always through this new human-focused lens. But here's the thing. The Renaissance wasn't just one single movement. As these powerful ideas started spreading out from Italy, they got mixed in with local cultures, creating this whole different Northern European version of the Renaissance.
So what you got to understand is they had different priorities. Down in Italy, you had the idealized, perfect beauty of Michelangelo's sculptures, paid for by rich merchants. But up in the north, you've got artists like Dürer using oil paints to capture this kind of raw, unflattering honesty. And thinkers up there were way more focused on using these new ideas to reform religion. Now, the key takeaway here is really in those differences. The Italian Renaissance was often more secular, focusing on classical myths and the perfection of the human form. But the Northern Renaissance, that was driven more by Christian humanism, zeroing in on everyday life and religious reform. And that little difference is about to become a very, very big deal.
And the spread of all these new ideas, both the Italian kind and the Northern kind, was absolutely supercharged by a new technology. This was the second and maybe the most critical link in our chain reaction. This is the thing that turned that little spark of new ideas into an absolute wildfire. This is it, the Gutenberg printing press from around 1450. Before this thing came along, knowledge was basically locked away in these super expensive, handwritten books that only the very wealthy or the church could get their hands on. But the printing press meant books could be made way faster, way cheaper, and in huge quantities. It was, no joke, the internet of its day. And this just shows you how unbelievably fast it spread. I mean, in less than 30 years, printing presses went from being a weird little invention in Germany to being a major industry all across Europe. Information was suddenly moving like never before. And this quote from back then just says it all. It sparked this hunger for knowledge. For the first time ever, regular people could get access to books, to big ideas, and to a world way beyond their own small town. So what happens when you combine that Northern Renaissance focus on religious reform with a technology that can spread radical ideas almost instantly? Well, you get the next explosive link in the chain. The humanist idea of going back to the original source texts gave people the tools to not just admire the church, but to really start critiquing it. And that brings us to Martin Luther. He's a German monk, totally soaked in this new humanist way of thinking. In 1517, he nails his 95 Thesis to a church door. His main target, like you see in this quote, was the sale of indulgences, which was basically paying the church to forgive sins. Luther looked at the original Bible and said, hey, this isn't in here. Faith is what matters, not buying forgiveness. And thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas went viral. The result wasn't just some academic debate. It was the shattering of 1,000 years of religious unity in Europe. Luther's protest just opened the floodgates. Pretty soon you've got John Calvin in Geneva, King Henry VIII in England breaking away from the Pope for his own reasons. The whole map of Europe was being redrawn, and individuals were starting to stand up to this huge central authority. And this leads us to the final world-altering link in our chain reaction. Once the absolute authority of the church had been successfully challenged on faith, it was really only a matter of time before its authority on, well, reality itself was questioned. I mean, if the Pope could be wrong about how to get to heaven, could he also be wrong about the stars? The new standard for truth became evidence. If you couldn't actually prove something through observation and experiments you could do over and over again, it was just an opinion. This was a complete break from just accepting what some ancient philosopher or the church had said for centuries. And they actually formalized this process into what we now call the scientific method. Thinkers like Francis Bacon were huge champions of this. It's a clear process. Ask a question, get some data, come up with a logical guess, test that guess like crazy, and then see what you've got. It's the engine that drives all of modern science. And the results were just staggering. You had Copernicus saying, hey, actually, the Earth revolves around the sun, which directly challenged the church. William Harvey figured out how blood actually circulates through our bodies. And of course, Isaac Newton comes along and develops the universal law of gravity. The universe wasn't some unknowable mystery anymore. It was like a machine that could actually be understood. So why does this 300-year-old chain reaction still matter so much to us now? Well, because the core ideas that came out of these 3 revolutions are literally the foundation of the world we live in right now. From the Renaissance, we inherited this powerful belief that the individual actually matters. Our ideas about creativity, human potential, and basic human rights, they all have their roots right there in humanism. From the Reformation, we inherited the principle that it's okay, and sometimes necessary, to question authority. The idea of individual conscience, the right to challenge the powers that be, that's a direct legacy of this religious shakeup. And from the scientific revolution, we inherited our reliance on reason and hard evidence. Our entire technological, medical, and information-driven society is built on the scientific method. The individual matters. You should question authority, and you should trust the evidence. These weren't separate ideas. They were a powerful, interconnected cascade of change that shaped everything. It just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. What great chain reaction are we living through right now?